Welcome everybody to the heart of the matter in coaching and emotional intelligence. Thanks for joining us today. And as you see, we're in meeting form, not in webinar, because we love to have your participation. So Mike and Andrea will kind of monitor for questions. So if you've got your hand up, one of them will note you, or if you put something in the chat box, it will come up to us. So I'm not going to have you all on my screen, so I won't be able to see everybody, but Mike and Andrea will be noting that. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to talk about this framework, or what we're calling a coach framework for the EQI. We want to talk about what matters about the EQI model in terms of EQ coaching, and in particular, what is at the heart of the matter in each of these 15 EQ competencies. And then we've developed some examples of EQ coaching questions so that you can get a sense of where you might go as a coach in each of these, to explore each of these 15 competencies in a little bit more depth with clients. So just as a reminder for everybody who hasn't yet done the EQI certification or being exposed to the model, this is the EQI model of emotional intelligence. You can see at the center is emotional intelligence. And then the next set out is what we call EQ skills or competencies. These are competencies that have emotion involved with them, and that's what the science is showing, is that these skills each require a competency around handling our emotions and using our emotions effectively in order to be effective in the skill itself. The next circle up beyond that is what we call the composite areas. So there's 5 major composite areas that encompass everything from our perception of ourselves, our expression of ourselves, our relationships with others, our processes in decision-making, and handling and managing stress. And then the outside circle tells us what the EQI is measuring around effectiveness. And that's our emotional and social functioning and how effective we are. It's our well-being, and most importantly, perhaps our performance at work and life. The EQI is an inventory. It's not a test, although many clients come on saying I passed or failed the test, and they're either dismayed or delighted by that. But it's an inventory. So we ask clients through an online assessment process to respond to 133 items about how they operate under different conditions where emotions are involved. We all have and can develop EQ skills. We kind of learn them more inadvertently over our lifetimes rather than intentionally. We don't take courses in EQI. We're lucky or less lucky to have parents and mentors and people in our lives who have helped us develop EQ skills. It's unlikely that they've been named EQ skills, but we either have them or we've been exposed to them, but we all have them. When people get their responses, what they really get is what we think of as their default setting, kind of their go-to, like where do I land in handling these different experiences and opportunities? And what we're trying to teach people is the idea that they can choose to build range, in other words, to expand or contract the use of the skill in these 15 areas. So EQ coaching in the big picture is really about helping clients move from having an assessment tool to building it into a coaching process. So in the big picture, we're trying to develop awareness, balance, thriving, resiliency, all the things that clients who are looking for coaching come to us with. So we're trying to focus on looking at patterns of awareness and interrupting those patterns, moving from this idea of default or being less aware of their actions and impacts to, or what we're calling this life drift, so drifting to more intentionality. We want to teach people this process of adjusting their range. So am I showing up with too much empathy, and is it getting in the way of getting what I need in life? Or am I too flexible? And do I need to decrease that range so that I'm less accommodating, or accommodating in balance with my own needs? And we want to teach people choice. Sometimes these default operations that we sort of default to feel like they're not a choice, but a natural trait or tendency. The EQI is not a measure of traits and tendency. It is a measure of using skills. And so we are helping our clients make choices about how they use these 15 competencies. So the range up and down on all 15, but also choosing where in the range they're showing up. We want people to understand their impact, the implications of each of these competencies and how they use them under different circumstances. And then most importantly, maybe the EQI really points to what needs a client's attention. And this idea of discernment, helping clients discern what matters and what's important for them. Most importantly, I suppose that we want people to understand that emotions support or limit each of these processes and relationships. So the EQ coaching framework makes a set of assumptions to help people interpret their results. The first one is that emotions are data. And by that, we mean that what we now know is our brains process emotions before they process any other kind of data. And so we need to teach people, we hope that we're teaching people that their emotions matter. And that's really what this is about, is helping people understand that at the heart of the matter very often is their emotion. And if they receive it as data rather than emotions to be feared or emotions to be silenced or frivolous, emotions as frivolous, then they can use them in a more effective way. The assessment, the EQI assessment, connects emotions with effectiveness and well-being.
The idea of, there's been a lot of research to know that, emotions actually, our brains are processing emotions and cognitive information simultaneously. And many neuroscientists would argue that the emotions are coming first. And the big question is, about how am I operating versus who I am. Sometimes those things get confused in it. And one of the things in the coaching framework is to help clients recognize that difference.
So following the who I am is also where I am. So it's a measure of context. Again, unlike traits and tendencies, which is more static measure of who people are, the context is where am I in life? What's happened to me? Have I had a loss of a parent, or am I caring for an older parent? Have I just changed jobs? Am I in a job that I feel less certain of? Do I have a boss that I don't connect with or feel bullied by? All of those contexts influence how you're able to operate. Internally, the context is more about our beliefs, what limits us or what creates opportunities and potentials for us. And all of that belongs in this conversation. And ultimately, of course, we want people to recognize their emotions and what they're doing with them, how they're responding to them, and teach them that they are managing their emotions rather than their emotions managing them. Here's the analogy that we've been using recently, and we find it quite helpful. This idea of a mixing board or music soundboard, which is about range, really, and adjustments. So if we pushed all those sliders up to the very highest level, a musician would not produce beautiful music. They would produce kind of loud, harsh sound. And if they pulled all the sliders to the very bottom, they would get no sound at all. And if they put them in one fixed position, they would just get a repeat of the same sound over and over again. So what the music soundboard analogy, or the soundboard itself, offers musicians and producers is this vast array of ways of producing the sound that they want to produce, the effects that they want to have. So a musician or producer doesn't approach the mixing board like, I want to always use the highest level, right? Because that's not what the board offers. It offers this opportunity to create and adjust and balance. So when we transfer that idea to the idea of range for EQI, that's what we are helping coaches try to understand, is when I approach this situation, when I approach this relationship, when I'm trying to handle this context or this decision, what do I need to dial up and what do I need to dial back? How do I need to adjust to handle this most effectively? That's really, in a nutshell, what it's about. But as I referred to before, sometimes in our default, we lean into 3 or 4 or 5 of the 15 competencies, and we kind of leave some of the others a little bit more dormant. So it might show up on an assessment. People don't have a lot of self-regard, or they don't have a lot of assertiveness, or they don't do well in problem solving. So those are kind of laying dormant. And so we also want to help clients build range so that you're using all 15 competencies in the right way. And that's, again, this idea of discernment. How do you decide or know what's required in this context or relationship?
Jill, this is where I always think of your other analogy, the potluck analogy.
Yeah. So I was working with this matters because he was a grocery chain senior leader, and so he's thinking about food all the time. And so he really leaned heavily on about 5 of his competencies. And so as we were talking about this idea of bringing some of them out of dormancy, he's like, oh, it's like bringing the same meal to every potluck dinner, right? Like I always bring artichoke dip when there's about 1 billion recipes out there. So it's like, why do I always bring my social responsibility or my emotional expression to every situation? What else is available to me that I'm not using as effectively? So yeah, the potluck dinner.
Yeah, and yet if he gets praised every time you bring the spinach dip or the artichoke dip, every time you're going to bring it. So what we get rewarded, how we get rewarded to show up, and what we're encouraged, how we're encouraged to show up. It's interesting how these, when we're not aware, without the awareness, how they shape us.
Yes. Yeah. And others shape us. Yeah. Great. And so again, as with the mixing board, they're all moving in connection with each other. If we're lower in one, it may influence other aspects of our competencies. And so they're all connected to each other, even though they get presented in the report as independent variables, they're very much connected. And that's this idea of balance and connection as well. And most importantly, it's a development tool. So all of these can be developed in people. Here's an image of a report just so that you have a picture of that. And so each one of these 15 competencies underneath the composite area, you get a range in. The gold bar, if you're not familiar with it, is just the performance of high-performing leaders, the measure of high-performing leaders. And so you can see down, up and down the range that this person has. Some areas that are underdeveloped potentially, or they may be just set at the right level. And that's the thing, you can't look at this and see that this is a good score, because high and low, like the music soundboard, doesn't mean good or bad. It just means that's where my range is. But really what we want to know is that people can move around in that range and that they have discernment about what's required for them.
The other part of range, I suppose, and scores is just, bringing Dr. Phil to the meeting today, although that wasn't my intention, is always the question, how's that working for you? Regardless of your score, is it a high score, is it a low score? How's that working for you? And if it's not, that may be an area to make some adjustments and to try and move the dial. So we're going to dig into each of the competencies, and self-regard is the first. And really, what we've tried to identify here from a coaching perspective now, if you were coaching to self-regard, what actually would you be coaching to? What's the heart of the matter? And, from our perspective, it's essence is a great word for self-regard. Awareness, acceptance, stability, etc. And what is the matter? Never enough, takes on too much, perfection, inflated ideas about self, doesn't matter. Essence and awareness and acceptance and stability, all are matters that we're really coaching to in terms of self-regard. Some coaching questions that come up. What do you believe about yourself? How does it serve you? What kind of bully beliefs might you have about yourself that are not serving you? What do you need to accept about yourself? When do you feel you are enough or not enough? Sort of this dominant discourse, if you will. What might you be neglecting for yourself? What holds you back? And what is a more empowering perspective of self? This is hopefully the outcome of a conversation with a client around self-regard. This would be a great question to be working towards.
So again, please feel free to jump in with questions along the way. We've set it up as a meeting so that can happen.
Absolutely. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so because a lot of these coaching questions, they seem to be geared a lot towards if someone maybe is a little bit low.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have the dominant component, right?
Mm-hmm.
But are there some good questions for someone whose maybe ego is a little extra?
You know,
I speak from personal experience, so that's why I'm asking.
yeah, yeah. I always make sure when I'm introducing the framework that I give examples on both ends. And one of the examples I use so that people don't feel it's a personal comment, but just a general one. I talk about the bull in the china shop, and those might be, that might be where a person has high self-regard, high assertiveness, maybe low empathy, high problem solving, high stress tolerance, etc. So I always set it up that way so people, when we get to that question, we always check to see with people, our question when we're debriefing begins with, how's this working for you? Like, what do you love about this way of being? And, you know, sort of how's that working for you in a positive way? But then we also want to say, are there any implications, sort of downsides of it? Or what are the potential blind spots in that high score? So we're always asking people to explore both sides of the range. So if it's high, we want to understand what they love about it, how it works for them, what they believe is effective about it, and then the potential downsides or risks. It's very hard for people in self-regard to see a downside, and often you will see it more in other things like low empathy, for example, or low social responsibility, or low flexibility. I don't know, Mike, other thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Amy. And it's almost, you know, I love what you're saying, Jill, about the other side. There's always an implication to a high score, a potential implication. So it's things like, you know, have you ever, you know, how are you with feedback? Do you ever, are you ever not accepting of feedback? Have you ever, has anyone ever suggested you might be overly confident about things? And so, you know, it is important to explore both sides. But at the end of the day, I think the point we're making is essence is all about it. What is the essence that you are striving for in balance? You know, the what holds you back question is a good question, whether high or low, right? Maybe your overconfidence or, you know, not taking feedback is actually holding you back. So sometimes it takes a little discussion, though, to get to that.
Yes, it might not be the first thing we try to raise either, as we're trying to create this environment where people are really exploring the meaning of their results for them, and then seeing where they need to potentially make adjustments. Self-actualization is the second of the 15 competencies, and the heart of the matter in self-fulfillment and in self-actualization is fulfillment and growth mindset. So the two sides of it, one is sort of on the values, purpose, meaning, fulfillment side, and the other is growth mindset, which are clearly very connected. Sometimes in the coaching world, we might think about more on the being and doing side. So it's not always about doing, but it's about more that side of being. So the being is more in fulfillment, and the doing might be more on the side of growth mindset. So when clients come with potential matters of concern, they might find themselves either in or out of alignment with their values or their goals. They might have a passion that they're not fulfilling or pursuing. They might be in a place where, you know, this week we had a conversation about burnout and fatigue, where purpose and meaning have kind of faded for them. And so that's showing up in self-actualization. They might be bored in a job, and so they've lost their sense of why they're there and what they're contributing. And they may have not, you know, in the busy years of people's lives, not have had much of a chance to develop themselves or contribute to the development of others. So those are all aspects of self-actualization that might show up in a client in terms of what's behind their range and what matters to them. Again, coaching questions. You might ask, what does a meaningful life mean to you? You know, just a small question to get things started. Do your actions align with your values and purpose? And sometimes what you'll hear is an action doesn't seem to align with something, and often underneath that is a value that they have stepped over or someone else has stepped on. Questions like, what impact do you want to have? So again, getting people back in touch with who they are and the reason that they're doing what they're doing. check out what aspects of your life are fulfilling, and do they need to do more of that, or say yes to more of the things that are fulfilling and no to some of the things that are less fulfilling for them. Another values question: are there gaps between your values and your actions and behaviors? So just trying to uncover again where there's alignment or a lack of alignment with some of these between values and actions. The third composite in self-perception, third competency in the self-perception composite area is emotional self-awareness. So again, just a reminder that these 15 competencies are not emotions, but the research shows that they're highly correlated with emotions. In other words, emotions are very involved in whether or not we're effective use these skills effectively. So the heart of the matter for emotional self-awareness is really mindfulness. How much are you paying attention to your mindfulness? So actually, it shouldn't say disconnection. It should really, this is more what the matter is in the problem, but it's about connection to your emotions here and an ability to be guided by values. And there's no discrepancy. Sorry, so this one's a little off. This is like probably more what the matter is. So the matter for emotional self-awareness is really this idea that you're dialed into your emotions, that you treat them as important information, and that they help guide and not just on the values level, but guide decisions, guide processes, and help to align you with who you are. So what are some of the things that matter to clients? They may be disregarding emotions. You know, we've had for a number of decades, the idea that emotions need to be discounted. So you leave emotions at the door. There's no place for emotions at work. So we're trying to reverse some of that deeply socialized belief in our culture, as well as in individuals, that emotions don't matter. So we may have clients that disregard emotions very actively or just unconsciously. We also find that lots of people are unable to differentiate between emotions or name emotions. So that's sometimes a place that we start in, just kind of developing a vocabulary of emotions. And if I was shameless, I would be promoting our new emotion cards as a way to start, but I won't do that. So there's a general lack of awareness about their emotions, and then a lack of awareness about how they're using them and how they're impacting themselves and others. For coaching questions, just, you know, a basic one: do you recognize different emotions and how they're impacting you? They're really, you know, for some people, they have very limited vocabulary, and so they can name sort of the happy, sad, mad, glad, angry, and not much beyond that. I've even talked to people who just have a couple of emotions, and they think the world's kind of divided between that good and bad. And also placing value on different emotions. Rather than seeing emotions as data, they see them as bad or unpleasant emotions, or good and pleasant emotions. And we really take the approach that all emotions have information in them, and that they're worthy of our attention. Just a question about what you believe about emotions. To my earlier point, how have you been socialized? Do you have limiting beliefs about emotions that get in the way of you attending to your emotions? What emotions are comfortable for you? What emotions are hard to be with? How do your emotions affect others? Do you follow your heart? And people, you know, like, that's a very important question for some people. It's like, you will learn a lot from a client by asking that question. Anything else, Mike?
So far, so good, Jill.
I just wanted to add to, it just strikes me as how important in the perception, or the interoception of emotion, that range comes to me, Jill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's that understanding how we work, pardon me, because we know that the ingredients of an emotion are what we're sensing, and then what we name it. So butterflies in the stomach could be anything from anticipation and excitement, could be a stomach flu, could be like, so it's so the data concept of this information rich possibilities to help inform and guide are really essential in helping us just like come up with that next best plan, that the next best action, the next best what to do and how to respond to the moment.
Mhm. I had a friend who was going through Weight Watchers a number of years ago, and uh, one of the things that they taught was to use the scale as data, not to use the scale with judgment. And it's an interesting idea. So when you get on the scale, you don't say, "Oh my gosh, it's so great, I've lost 5 pounds," or "Oh dear, I've gained 10," um, but rather use it as information to make decisions going forward. And I think to some extent that's what Andrew's talking about, and that's really what we're talking about here, is that we're reading it without judgment. We're reading the emotion and wondering how it's trying to inform us. And I think it's a very hard practice for people to get away from the idea that we're judging the emotion all the time.
As a navigational tool, there's nothing that's more authentic to us than our emotion.
Emotional expression is, now we're in the self-expression composite area. So how do we share ourselves with others? And in a way, how do we become more authentic and connected to others? So the heart of the matter is this idea of connection, and not just connection with others, but also this connection between emotional self-awareness and emotional expression. So when these are in balance with each other, it means that what we're feeling is what we're expressing, and maybe not in those exact precise ways, like there may be a filter there, but that there's a congruence between what we feel and what we say. When they're out of balance, you can picture somebody who has high emotional self-awareness and low emotional expression. We might think of them as shy, we might think of them as withholding, we might think of them as not a contributing member of the family or the work team. And the other way around, when there's low self-awareness but high emotional expression, maybe some of you can think of a politician or two that comes to mind in that regard, where people are speaking without attending to their own internal dynamics or having awareness of their own feelings and expressing them in a way that's appropriate. So it really leads to authenticity when there's a connection and balance between self-awareness and emotional expression. And there are times, for example, in coaching, where we may dial down our emotional expression a little bit, but continue to have high emotional self-awareness. So that's that idea of being mobile in our range, and under different contexts, we may use each of these more independently or more connected. When we are more authentic, we develop more trust. This is a place where we talk about sharing our truth, and where there's either incongruence or resonance. And that's what you read when there's either connection between and balance between these two, or imbalance. You either get an incongruence or a resonance. So what matters here is, again, sometimes the belief that expressing emotions is risky, that there's too much vulnerability on the one side, and so there's under expression, or there's oversharing. And by oversharing, it might mean that they're not attending to the context in which they're sharing, or considering the feelings of others, or and I put oversharing because it's kind of also being weaponized as a way to keep people quiet. So we don't want to do that, but it is about how much are we sharing, and are we attending to the effects of others. So coaching questions: do you ever feel emotionally exhausted? How can you leverage your emotional expression skills to refuel? So in other words, can you ask for what you need rather than just continue to feel exhausted and tapped out? What are the benefits of vulnerability? Lots of people feel like vulnerability is too much of a risk or something to be avoided, rather than seeing the upsides or benefits of vulnerability. What is the impact of the balance or imbalance between emotional self-awareness and emotional expression? Have others ever misread or misunderstood you? And what would it mean to you if you could express your true voice? Anybody have questions or thoughts so far? Or again, just checking in. Okay. Right, assertiveness. That's another way of, it's in the composite of self-expression. So in the heart of the matter is, how do we show up? What are we standing up for? What do we need to speak up about? And all of that is framed within this idea of both clarity on the one hand, so being clear about what you're asking for, and kindness, that it's not attached to aggression. And often clients express their reluctance to build their assertiveness muscle because they feel like they will become aggressive. And so when we attach it to kindness, that's part of the purpose of assertiveness is to ask for what you need, or to tell the other person where there's an issue, but to say it in a way that builds the relationship. So you're able to express yourself, but with the desire of maintaining or building the relationship. So it's an invitation to understand, to share your understanding of something, and to dialogue about what the implications are of what you're asking for. What matters about this for clients from an emotional aspect, many people want to avoid conflict. They've had, it may be that they have too closely coupled the idea of conflict with real fear or risk, and not had an experience of safe conflict or safe disagreement. And so for them, the avoidance of conflict means in general, they're avoiding all difficulties because it's overly related to actual risk. For example, being in an abusive relationship, children growing up witnessing or being abused. And so or being with a boss who's being very abusive or use power in ways that were inappropriate. So they conflate assertiveness with that level of being unsafe. So we're trying to help them see that there's a different intention and a different experience in being able to be assertive. Sometimes when people score low on assertiveness, there might be a people pleasing, and I really wish we could find another way of thinking about that term, but I think we understand it, so I've used it here. But a way of thinking more about other people than they think about themselves. So saying yes to things when they really want to say no, or not asking for what they need within the context of the relationship. And again, this idea of fear that's in there. So people are afraid to ask for what they need because it has in the past had consequences that were harmful. So coaching questions, just pretty straightforward. What do you find challenging about being assertive? I mean, we always start with the range, like what do you love about it? And then maybe what you find challenging about it. What do you want to say that you haven't said? That's a very powerful question, because they can maybe say it in the context of a coaching context. When you need to hold someone accountable, what is your approach? And what stands between your values and your voice? So what you really want to say, and values we could replace with needs or wants or desires or dreams, and you're giving voice to that. So trying to find out what's in that gap between what we feel, what we want, and what they're expressing. And sometimes it's about not wanting to disappoint people, feeling like their own needs don't matter that much, they're okay, they don't need to really be looking after themselves, they're fine the way they are, and it's okay if if the group wants to do that, that's okay, etc. Okay, so independence is the third of the self-expression. So again, you can see Ruth Bader Ginsburg here as the, kind of the icon of independence, going against the cultural norm for something that she strongly believed in, that was for the greater good. So this idea of I did it my way, we could all think of the toddlers who are kind of trying to find their way in independence and taking a stand on things. But we need to do that all our lives, to figure out doing it your way. But the discernment is what is behind that wanting to do it your way. Is it for the greater good? Is it because you want to show up and respect your own values and your own needs, chart your own course? Or is it too high in independence where you're not attending to how other people are experiencing it, or other people's needs being met, or you're trampling on other people, etc. So this is one where we really see we ask people to really practice using the range between low independence, which might be about collaboration and community and greater good and other people, and working in that way, and then being able to depart from the way that the team is thinking and express your own opinion or have a different approach or perspective, and not be afraid to say so. So wanting to be seen and heard, but not in that bully way that we talked about earlier. So the matter might be self-reliance, too much self-reliance, too little self-reliance here. And so what is the right amount? And again, that's discernment, the wisdom to know the difference, right? How much courage do you have versus fear? If fear is holding you back, what do we need to do there? But if there's so much courage that you're trampling over people, what needs to be adjusted there? So what are your beliefs about getting along with people? Do you care what other people think? Or what of those ideas are interfering with you being able to be independent or express your independence? Coaching questions. Sometimes I start with more of a scenario. Describe a time when you had to make a final decision when others felt differently from you. So getting at how people process those kinds of differences. How did you proceed? What was the outcome? And then it's like, what's your way? What are your beliefs about independence and dependence? What are the potential risks or blind spots of high independence? How does caring about what other people think limit or hold you back? What's the right balance? So again, you can see balance. Shanice.
Thinking, with this independence subscale, like the connection to interdependencies between teams as well. So if there is conflict, that brings somebody to coaching, and then that self-awareness piece isn't quite where it needs to be. Exploring the interdependency, how they're experiencing themselves, how they're experiencing others, can also shed light into the individual's self-awareness as well. Would that be accurate?
100%. And again, I think it's so important what you're saying, because we're presenting these as if they're independent variables. And if you remember my earlier comments, and what Shanice is pointing to is this balance between all of them. So it's not a single competency that's being expressed. It's in context of the operation of lots of those competencies all together. And so absolutely that sense of awareness and impact. So we might bundle empathy in there. Do you care how you're impacting others? What are the implications for others? Absolutely. Thanks, Shanice.
And Jill, Carey has a comment in the chat box here.
Thanks.
Calling out just about seeing independence show up, culturally. She's referring to the United States here, that contextually is a factor as well.
Yes, yeah, it's constitutional, isn't it? There's an emphasis over individual rights versus responsibilities, and both matter, but the balance is really ultimately what matters. Is that when you're in balance between rights and responsibilities, I would guess you had a fairly healthy culture, but the discourse around rights has kind of taken a direction that we might not think is healthy or safe. Okay, independent. Interpersonal relationships is the next composite area, or interpersonal is the next composite area. Interpersonal relationships is the first competency. The heart of the matter in interpersonal relationships, the heart of the matter is reciprocity or mutuality, that both sides benefit equally from the relationship. That there's respect and trust, and that people are willing to share what's beneath their surface, and the other side is willing to receive what's beneath the surface. So there's very much a sense of reciprocity here. So when clients come with matters of concern, they're often concerned about a lack of connection where emotions are involved. So one person's holding back, or somebody's holding back, or they're choosing to hold back. Very often what we see is, and we've talked about this in other webinars, is one person's in a partnership paradigm, so they want reciprocity, mutuality, respect, equality, and the other person is more interested in having power and control. And so those two paradigms can't work together. And that's true in our own relationships personally, but it's also true in work environments where where people believe in collaboration and teamwork, and then you may have a leader who believes in a more hierarchical structure or more autocratic and is falling back on more traditional styles of relationships. And so those may intersect in a way that doesn't work well for people. So coaching questions: how would you characterize your relationships? Are they mutual? Are there benefits for both sides? Is someone benefiting more than someone else? Because that may be the pain point for a client. How comfortable are you in your emotions with others, both in expressing them and receiving them? What does it mean that you describe yourself as an introvert or extrovert? Because sometimes people will say, oh, I scored low on that because I'm an introvert. And in some ways, they're asking me to step over the idea of relationships for them because they've dismissed it as being an introvert. And that's where I really get curious. What does that mean for you? Where is it satisfying? What are you longing for that you're not getting? What's missing in your life? Is there fulfillment there? And actually what most people say that they're introverts, and what they are saying is that they value a small group of people with meaningful conversations and meaningful connection. And that they're not necessarily as social anymore. No, that's because we're mostly aren't coaching 20 people in their 20s. We're mostly coaching people who are later in their lives. And so, you know, in some ways I would suggest that we do get more selective in our relationships as we get older. We're clearer about our own values. We're clearer about who we are. We're clearer what we need in relationships. So I'm always very curious when people hand me that label. And I think there's a lot in there to explore. And then where are there opportunities for growth there? So are you willing to risk yourself to expand this range? Mostly it's expansion, but of course it's also, are there impacts for being highly social? Are there relationships that aren't getting attended to? What would the benefits be of expanding the range, both for you and for others? Empathy is the next one in interpersonal relationships. You can see we're not going to get through this, and David said we weren't going to get through it. And under the reality testing section, I have the question, do you have enough PowerPoint slides for one session? So we had considered having a part 2, and that's probably what will happen here. So I just want to name that before people are feeling anxious about whether we get finished or not. So the heart of the matter in empathy is being able to appreciate the perspectives and feelings of others and care about the impact you're having, so that others feel seen and heard, and that you stay out of judgment. So that in my other work, when I work with women who've experienced abuse, my co-author often says, if I find myself moving towards judgment, I just say to myself, I don't have enough information yet. And I think it's just such a powerful reminder to help us stay out of judgment. If it seems like there's a simple solution to something, I just don't know enough yet. And you can picture that, like when somebody gives you advice and in your mind, you're thinking they don't understand, right? They don't know enough about how challenging or how complicated or how complex it is. They just don't have enough information. So often what the matter is here is that people don't understand the impact they're having on others, or on the other end of the range in high empathy, that caring too much can be a derailer for people. Often when I'm working with women leaders who score high in empathy, it's a wonderful attribute and has got them where they are in many ways. And the potential risk in it is that caring too much means they're avoiding having difficult conversations with people, because it's the caring, they don't want to disappoint people, they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so that's the balance, for example, with assertiveness. So how do you ensure that you're having the impact you intend? Of course, you ask. Has your empathy ever prevented you from having a difficult conversation or making a tough decision? Is there anything you might do differently to balance empathy with assertiveness? And then our own question to ourselves as coaches, what is the role of compassion in coaching? So as coaches, how do we use empathy and compassion? Social responsibility is the third in the interpersonal composite area. And the heart of the matter is the contribution and service for the greater good, feeling responsible for contributing to community and having an awareness of inequities and privileges. And what the matter is often attention to culture. So we think of our own actions, sort of an every person for himself approach, this idea of merit, which is I've earned my way, other people will earn their way, rather than thinking that I want my actions to contribute to everybody having opportunities within the organization or within the culture. So questions around that, or how do you act in a way that is for the greater good? What emotions are present? And I think here people very often are in their busy years and they're not, they're not on the PTA, or they would like to be doing more volunteer work, but they don't have the time right now. And I think there's a kind of a sense of shame or regret or something's missing for them. And I really do try to reframe that. So in the communities that you're in, your family community, your work community, how are you contributing? Do you see yourself as contributing to the health of the organization, or the effectiveness and functioning and well-being of the organization? So it's a way of reframing some of that sense of, a bit of loss or regret. What are some examples of where your success can be attributed to others and not you alone? Back to, I think, your question earlier about self-regard, right? Like helping people see that it's taking a team of people to have success, that it's not the success of the leader themselves. How do you share your knowledge and experience? One of the ways that we think of social responsibility from a leader is, are you hoarding knowledge, or are you sharing knowledge and experiences? Are you mentoring and helping people along, or do you see it as a scarce commodity that is about giving you power? What is your belief about responsibility? What are your actions aligned with your beliefs?
Shanif made a comment about when you had mentioned really exploring some of the language that clients are using. He's just saying that important to establish that common language and understanding anytime there's a label that's being introduced into the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really easy, I find, to accept on face value that we have a shared understanding of a label, and it's really important as a coach to stay attentive to those things and give it more meaning. Ask the client what it means, for sure.
I was just looking for the raise hand thing.
Yeah, that's good. I got
it. In person and virtually. I was just thinking, when you ask these questions, these coaching questions are so valuable. I think it helps in the perspective, like, would you use this in your coaching practice when when this comes up and you see someone, on their inventory, let's say social responsibility, just because that's the one that's up. Yeah. Do you try to engage by thinking of these questions as a way to engage in those specific areas first? Like thinking, when I want to work with this client, I guess what I'm saying is I like these ideas as a questioning approach rather than like, what do you see? Maybe they don't know what they see, but when you ask these questions, it feels like it gives perspective on what they could see.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to see, how you use the questions, if that's the right kind of a way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think as a team, what we're coming to is that there is that first level, like kind of what do you see, right? So we want clients to have their voice in the inventory. It's their inventory. What are they seeing here? It does already raise some things. And then the coaching questions are the kind of next level of, if you're ongoing with a client, but even just as follow-ons to it. So I think both are right. There's not a right or wrong way, but I do like clients to have first say here, because I don't yet know enough about the context in which they're responding to start with coaching questions. Mike, you want to add to that? And then Shanif, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, I think questions emerge. Having questions ready and available, whether something is high in not serving or low in not serving, is a really good idea. But first we need to see what emerges and actually how is it working for them? Where are there any times when it's creating a challenge for themselves or even for others around them? Those are always probably the right place to start. But I agree, Carrie, that having these questions sort of available on the side of your desk, ready to go as things begin to emerge, is probably a really helpful thing.
Great. Shanif and then Amy.
Add to that one, Mike. I think that if we as coaches can get comfortable with the subject matter, like in social responsibility and what you would want to get curious about, but then it is really up to the client to get clear on the topic that they're bringing. So if they do want to talk about social responsibility and you establish that's what they want to talk about, the follow-up question would be, what specifically do you want to talk about and why does it matter to you? And from there, I think the questions can emerge.
Shanif, Great point. And I think both ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we're coaching, hopefully we're talking today about coaching to using the EQI, coaching to the EQI. Sometimes you're just coaching and EQ competencies are emerging, their lack of, their overuse of, et cetera. And so we come back to the tool both ways.
From today's session, a question that just keeps in my mind right now is, and I think it would go through all the subscales here, is who are you when nobody else is in the room? And I think that is such a powerful question to ask somebody to really think about their espouse versus inaction values and just their way of being and doing. That if that is something that you pop in, it actually helps the client think differently. Like, are they performing when they don't think they're performing? Are they genuine? Do they lack self-awareness? All of those things can come up with that question. Just wanted to offer.
I'm great when I'm all by myself, but it's with other people and problems I'm not as strong. Thanks, Shanice.
No, for me, like where it's coming from, it's like
Yeah.
I say my value is connection, but when nobody is around me, do I really look for ways to connect, or am I comfortable just sitting in front and watching Netflix?
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yeah, love
is
it.
where I would explore that.
Thanks, Shanice. Amy and then Deborah.
So mine's really quick, but I loved all of these examples. This was incredible. Thank you both for putting this on, and Andrea as well for your beautiful insights. But my question is, there's so many different things like if, then, when, if this is high and this is low, then these are some great questions to ask. I was curious if either through you or through MHS, in addition to the coaching report, which just is like, here's a bunch of questions you can ask. Is there something that's more correlating to, in these type of situations, here's some really powerful questions to ask when this is high and this is low, or this is, you have this combination of skills at play?
Yeah, I think the answer is no. And that's why we designed this next level coaching course, because we feel like we give people certification, and then with the DEQ, give them a deeper understanding, not a deep understanding, but a little bit more understanding about each of the 15 competencies or subscales. But we still haven't really developed people to be able to bring it into their coaching practice. And so that's what this is about, is the light touch on how might it look in coaching in a long-term way. So we think there was a gap there, and that's what we're trying to address in our coach course.
Perfect. Good pitch. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the setup. Appreciate it. Anybody want to ask about whether or not there's emotion cards available? No, I'm kidding. Deborah and then Jacqueline.
Thank you for this today. It's really helpful. Mine's more of a general question that's on my mind because I've been doing some debriefs recently.
Excellent.
And one of the trends I've noticed, just maybe it's just a little pocket I'm in, but I've had a number of people with quite low EQs overall. And so, to the point where a couple times going into them, I was feeling a little bit anxious myself about going into these debriefs. And overall, they've gone well, but I'm just wondering if you have any comments or best practices that you utilize when you're going into a debrief and the person's score is quite low and they're in a leadership role.
Want to take that, Mike?
I've got just writing a note. I have to step out. So unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I think, again, I never draw any conclusions or hypotheses around it. And sometimes I'm really surprised by the responses. Very often it has to do with context. And again, remembering so critically that this is not about who they are, but how they're operating. And when people can stay fixed there, they don't have to go to shame and embarrassment, but mostly people come in with that. So that's why I always say, you're all high achievers. Most people who do this are high achievers. And so we have this idea that high is good and low is bad, pass and fail. That is not this. We're looking at the range, and range is determined by many things, both internal beliefs and skill sets and relationship to emotions, and external things like a work environment that isn't working for us, like a family situation that's maybe deteriorating, or a big loss in your life. So that already just helps people set aside their own judgment of themselves. And then it's just an exploration. And one of the things Mike always says, and it's such a good reminder, that all scores are relative. So there are always higher and lower. So that's partly what we're looking for, is the relative difference as well. And why I don't talk about high and low results, but try to use range. Your higher range scores and your lower range scores takes a little bit of that judgment out of it as well. Those are just some preliminary thoughts. And sometimes people are in a really hard spot, and it's reflected in and that's where we go. That's what coaching is about. You're in a really hard spot right now. This isn't about high achievement. This is about development and support.
Yeah, and I guess it's also one of the things I've tried to do is talk a little bit about different types of intelligences, because this is not, emotional intelligence is not their whole. I'm dealing with sometimes engineers, people that are obviously incredibly intelligent, and have achieved some, what we would consider some great things, and that has helped dissipate a little bit. But it's just not wanting them to get into this cycle of negativity.
Exactly. I also sometimes talk about what got you here might not get you to the next level. So what got you here, all your technical, academic, like experience, like all those accomplishments got you here, but the next level, what's going to get you there? And that's that's the EQ determinant. And sometimes I use like physicians, right? When we leave a physician's office, we don't say, wow, that was the best technical equipment I've ever been exposed to, right? We say, we refer to the EQ side of things. And that helps people who have strong technical skills remember that that's baseline, like that's critical, but it's not sufficient. So all those things I think can be helpful to put this into the right context for them to get excited about. Jacqueline, and then we're going to say goodbye for today. And I guess we'll see you in a month or so.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks for today. It was fantastic. So I have actually a question. I had a question, but now I have a question based on what Deborah said. When you see, because I actually see the opposite sometimes, where it's like a lot of high scores, and I'm like, really? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, and then I have one other quick question if we have time.
Yeah. I think the high scores, I'm always asking them what they think others might think about that. So we're doing an informal 360 basically.
Okay.
What kind of feedback have you had around this?
Yeah.
And always looking for where might that not be working, right? So what are the implications of this? What would your team say about this high stress tolerance of you? And they'll be like right away, they'll say, yeah, it's hard on my team, right? So there's ways you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. And you gave me another tip last time, which was to dig into how they answer the actual questions, because sometimes there's something in there. So that's really helpful. So my other quick question, well, I don't know if it's quick, but if you're working with a group, which I'm starting to, and I'm doing debriefs individually, but then trying to create some kind of workshop around this, would these questions, I guess, in breakout groups or things like that, I mean, could you use some of these? Would you use some of, and how would you, I guess, I'm sort of interested.
Yeah. I mean, you would just send them away with it, like we do all the time in all of our courses, right? Just give them a question and have them explore it, and, be mindful of how deep you want people to go and what feels safe and not safe, but absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Great. Appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we will send you the follow-up link for the part 2 of this workshop.